How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Elvira Gonzalez here, and let's go to move on with this particular course, and especially how do we get here. Just to make a quick recap of this particular section, when we talk about is what is React, how React emerged from Facebook, and what are the specific problems that Facebook had back then when they have now a message drawer here with an icon like this, right? As well as a chat application and the main UI, where when somebody sends a message or when a user see the notification bell in there and click on that, there were no new message. So because this particular issue plus all the other ones that you can't imagine that happens at Facebook at that time, you suddenly realize that hey, this is like guacamole here, because this specific issue was raised several times, plus adding new features and bug fix some others and so on and so forth, and they have now an internal team, the R&D, where they were developing is a particular tool to help them to now sync the UI by having a state, and this state can now sync across all of the different view. So because this was the problem that they have, and now React say, hey, let's go to now is keep the state and sync with the UI, whatever UI it is. And this was actually the groundbreaking discovery of this React application, or this user interface, when you want to provide now a lot of interactivity to them, right? So because React is all about the base on this particular state, and this is important to understand the concept of programming, right? For example, like value, which is the most important information of data in our programs that is used, or this is how programs manage our states, right? And because of this state needs to be shared across different user elements, user UI, all right? We need to find a way to actually make that happen. And, well, they define this particular way of encapsulating is now the components along with states and communicate with that. So this actually now changes the landscape of how we're going to traditionally create our user interface in a way that is much more interactive. But as the year passed, we, and of course the TC39 commit actually move on and apply all of this particular concept and make them now native to the language. So there are now attempts to bring this, for example, like signal in ECMAScript, okay, as a way to, which is a proposal, right? As a way to now provide the reactivity needed for that. And this reactivity is that a declarative programming model for updating based on change to state, right? So you have now a state, and if you want now a programming model, a way of doing things, so based when this particular change, when this particular state change, now you have a way of how to do that. And this is this particular way of how you can do this, all right? Example of vanilla JavaScript counter, where you have something like this. You define as an arrow function, where inside of this arrow function, you can now, as you can see here, access to this variable, all right? And then now render that, call that render function, whatever it is. And then you say something like this: hey, it's even, or it's parity, and this render. So no matter which function it is, you can is simulate external update to the counter with this, right? Hey, after 1 second, I want you to update is the value of the counter. So this is just a way of how now this is done with all of this. And they have a number of problems. The counter setup is noisy and boilerplate heavy. For example, like this. Alright? And then you have now the counter change but parity. And they now describing is what is the proposal here. They're gonna allow you to create now a particular object here, okay, where the state you define is the value of the whatever it is, as well as the computer property, right? Hey, all of these particular concepts are coming from frameworks, React, for example, in this case, and the computer in from Vue and that kind of stuff, right? And then actually is mentioned something like this: no count 2010 actually describe that kind of stuff. A library of framework defining effects based on other signal primitive. So for example, like this is the reason why we actually are diving into what the React is doing, what it is, and what are the built-in, or what is the problem that React aims to solve when you have now a particular state that needs to be shared across different user element or UI or HTML tag. All right, that's the problem that it's solving. And now you have here is signal here, as well as a computer property. Hey, if I want to actually is get a derivative state, all right. This is how would you like to do this, right? So, but in any case, this is something that is still in the early phases of the language. In fact, it has now 2 years from that meeting, and it's still in stage 1. You know, and again, as you can see, is this? It is a combination between the Angular, Bubble, Ember, Fast, Pre, Quick, RxJS, Solid, Starbeam, Svelte, Vue, Wiz, right? And more. Differently from Promise, we're not trying to solve for a common developer facing Surface API, but rather, and again, it's describing is what it is. But as you can see, is this is the stage 1, and we can take a look at this proposal, which is still on the stage 1 after 2 years of here. This is one of the reasons why this kind of proposals can take sometimes weeks, months, years, or even decades. Not that long, not that decades, but just years, yet along years. So yes, so we are going to have this natively, which is awesome, powerful, good, great. Yeah, yes, absolutely, 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 yep, absolutely. As you can see, Angular, Angular Universal, Webpack, Falcor. So okay, that makes a lot of sense for him. My respect, sir. My respect, her, sir. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, cool, cool. But is this? This is it. Yeah. Now, so we also dive deep into the React 19 version. What are the difference between the previous and the current one, and why React now is actually creating is stabilize certain APIs for example, like the server components, as well as introduce a new API, which is the uh, the form. What is the API that the introduction? In React 19, let me see if I can. The word they are introducing is I think it is. There you go. It's now stable. Exactly, actions. The API actions, which is very specific for filling forms, right? Again, remember, all of this particular problem that they provide to you is just, as well as new hooks, use action state, and so on and so forth. But all of this that they are providing to you is just way in how you can actually is to solve their Facebook problems. That's all. That's all. New DOM static API, pre-render to node stream, right? To actually create that entire pre-rendering. That's interesting. You can actually pre-render that to node stream. And then return a new response with the prelude and the headers. That's interesting. As well as the server component to stabilize this server component as it is, right? Interesting improvement in React 19 in Rev as prop. So now you can, which is something that we're gonna discuss as well, we can actually get Rev as a props, right? In React 19, and you can now access Rev as a prop for function components. New functions component will no longer need forward ref, and we will be published a code month to automatically update your components to use the new ref props. That's interesting. In future versions, we will deprecate and remove forward ref. Okay. Diff for hydratation. Now it is quite much more descriptive here. Okay. As well as the context as a provider. Interesting. Cleanup function for ref. Interesting. Cleanup function for ref. User for values. And the thing here is that the community, let's see how the community is going to embrace all of this, right? This post was originally published in 2000 and has been updated in May with the stable release. So let's see how the community actually embrace this kind of stuff. Has already passed like 3 months after that final release. So we're gonna see how actually that works. It is way up. But in the meantime, okay, because React allows us to describe this user interface where it is powerful because with one single API we can describe the UI across different environments, okay, whether it's the browser or the mobile or the WebLG, all right, where each one of them has directive. In the case of using the React DOM, for example, using is the HTML directive, or in React Native using is this custom directive that is provided by React Native that target a specific UI elements in the iOS an Android or any other platform you need to provide, usually is both of this, as well as Windows, right? And in the case of WebLG, is actually targeting its directive from that environment. So, for example, like camera, perspective, I am not quite familiar to that. I am definitely not quite familiar to that, and I do think that that'll be a great segue to add that. That'll be a great segue to add that. Absolutely. Mm. 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 So for example, there are already cores with 3GS, so React Fiber. But React 3, React 3 fibers, I think it is. This is part of the tutorial. Well, as you can see, there are several of them. I think it's this one. Yep. For example, him. But yeah, I really, yep, is this one. First React application, blah blah blah.
In this lesson, we are going to talk about React and React 3 Fiber.
So yeah, it's a French, as you can see. This is what we're going to build, or he's building that, right? And I do think that's quite
examples and stuff, but
yeah, mind-bending stuff. Why is that? Well, because now, look at this. We can actually
let me introduce
not only
you React
is
3 Fiber, just
rendering is elements like this, but also is to I think that is a very interesting stuff, because we can also is now allowing us to, or talking to the AG, to the web, to the LLMs, to say, hey, I want you to generate this for me and provide some of this animation for. So I do think that this is a very powerful. Yeah, that's mind-bending stuff here. And then I know that is quite a lot. Before that, that's what we need to actually is start with the basics here. Okay, so with React, we also look at how can we create our own first React, which is at the end of the day, React is using is the DOM operations, which is a thin layer of around the DOM operations of creating the elements, right? And it allows us to add now specific things. For example, the name of the tag, as well as the props and the content in itself. So with that, and how you can create now this particular small user element, right? That as we move on with that, which is building your own React, since creating these elements are very tedious, okay, and at the end of the day, we are going to create is HTML tag and adding some logic to that. So that's why now we have is this GSX for, and GSX is this particularly markdown language, which allows to combine is JavaScript in HTML. And I know that a lot of people, they don't like that, but here I am not talking to the vast majority of people. I'm talking is to people that actually wants to understand this. And if you don't like it, there's the door. No, I'm not joking, man. I'm not joking. So in any case, and I do think that people that are here, that are listening to this, or even myself, are serious about it. They want to learn this. I want to understand this. Now, in any case, so this is GSX. So GSX, as we can see, is now this particularly markdown language that, in order to get it, we need to understand how can we write things here. What is an expression in the GSX using the curly braces? How can we use this GSX with HTML? So understand the difference from HTML. So for example, you have reserved keywords, as well as you can bind attributes here, or aka this dynamic this is attributes expressions. That's what I would like to call, or self-closing tag is another one. Case sensitive tags, attribute sensitive tags, right? And then well, having a small snippet here to create this converter, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then now the white space gotcha here, which is at the end of the day how now you are adding is a white space, and why adding a white space is important here. So then how you can now is creating some of this, or identify some of this anatomy of the GSX, and then understand the difference between the GSX with the template engines. So for example, Blades and others out there, right? Is that unlike those, you have to learn a specific way of how you can render all of these particular elements, whereas with GSX, the only language that you need to know is JavaScript. And I think that's quite compelling, right? Unlike, for example, Angular or Vue, where you need to learn is a specific template language, right, that allows you to, for example, rendering list of elements, or rendering a list of elements. Basically, that is like allow you to render a list of elements, and allow you to render a list of elements, for example, or showing elements with vif or vshow. And now here we just only use JavaScript. All right, so that's great, that's compelling, and because the way how we're gonna create our user interface is in this component like. So we don't have to define is the HTML or CSS or JavaScript. In fact, we are gonna bundle all of them into one single user element. Okay, so we need to understand is that how this component looks like. What is the anatomy of this component? And that is, that this component looks like this, which is the basic syntax for that. And what happened when we started to create our components in that way, right? What is the rules that we need to set abide for our components, as a way to put now in capital letters, all of that. All right, and where are the other components of this, or the anatomy of this component, which is the props, the children, and now we are able to understand that. So anytime that you create a component, which is at the end of the day a function that you're going to pass to the create React, and if you want to know how the props are actually passing down there, is because at the time that component is executed, all right? So when the create React, for example, like this, because at the end of the day, each one of those elements, because each one of those tags actually represent is now a component, all right, or in other words, is a React element, create React elements, which is a JavaScript object here. If we're using our GSX as this example, it's gonna be transpiled to JavaScript, and the transpilation is just a fancy way to say, hey, we're gonna convert this into one language to another high-level language, from Python to JavaScript, Java to Rust, and in our case, GSX to JavaScript. So when now the code is executed, all right, by any JavaScript engine, usually the browser, okay, is gonna detect this, all right, and then this is the properties that is gonna be injected at the language, okay, and it is behind the scenes that is going to now inject those properties to the friendly greeting. And this way is how you actually can have access to this property at runtime. And this is also to understand now, actually doing a deep dive into this to truly understand what is going on behind the scenes, especially when we're passing now props, as well as the children. So because now children are somewhat the same, it will follow the same logic, right? It's gonna inject to this component. In our case, we're not gonna passing any children, but if we say, for example, children, all right, children here will be null. Because hey, let's go to now render also is children here. It's a React is not element. I do think it's because it's not a function. This video was filmed here, cons root here. So it's because the version of React actually doesn't accept this, and in fact it is the friendly greeting here, and it makes a lot of sense. We can use this self-closing tag for this, and just passing this as it is. So this in theory is supposed to work. It doesn't work, no problem. What about this? You say it's not a function. You say it's not a function. So I'm assuming that we'll need to do something like this, right? No? Okay. It says render is not a function. Is render is not a function. Okay. So if render is not a function, that is somewhat mind bending. Is the so for this particular version, it is doing is this, but it doesn't accept that. Document the query selector, the root. It seems that it won't work. This video was filmed using React 17, but this code has been updated for React 19. So please use this, right? So if we go here, and if we try to render this, it's a create root, it's not a function. but it's from the React DOM. Okay. Well, I do want to reset this. Let me reset this. Okay. And here, this is interesting. Why this doesn't actually work? Render. And then pass the root here. Oh, it's not a function. It's so this newer versions. So this newer version doesn't allow to do this, and in fact, it just behave in this particular way. All right. So you don't have to provide this. So the function already know what it needs to be done with things like this. And they say root. You already have the root element where you're gonna mount this. Okay. And followed by this, and say, hey, create root is not a function. Create a root is not a function. Oh, I get it. And it's because it is now exported by the client. Okay. It's because it's now exported by the client model. Okay. All right. But in any case, in other models, you can actually now, since each one of them will be converted into a React component as it is, right? Each one of them will create now is a React component. You say this one and this one, all right? And if you want to actually nest it, each one of them, all right, you say something like this. You say, hey, this is how we do things here with this root render. And there you got it. But since this will live is only interesting, so you can mount several elements there. Okay, so here we want to do is stuff like this, right? Where I want to create is a new element here, but instead of doing this, I want to wrap this element in a div. Okay, and we're gonna pass any props to this. And now the content will be here is an array of all of this, right? And there you got it. So because this is similar to this, and at the end of the day, any time that in GSX you do things like this, especially with this HTML tag, it's gonna create now an element here. But if it find any function, or if it find any custom tag like this, it means that it's gonna call that function. It's gonna create that element with this particular function, and at runtime is gonna inject the props as well as the content of, as well as the children here, if it has. So this is where we can say, hey, something like this. I want to render is a children property, that we inject here, right? And as you can see, there is no children here, but we can say, hey, my children, I'm a children content of Josh, you know, and then it's gonna render that. But for the others, that's not, you know. And here, this is actually now how the React component inject those props, whether it is the name of the children's, in your functions at runtime. And I think that particular exercise is quite revealing in terms of how React actually works behind the scenes, which is also complete with the children props. And the children prop is not something that is come up out of the thin air, right? They just didn't pop up this and say, hey, children, no. This is actually an HTML prop that you don't use that. It's quite cumbersome to go with, but it'll allow you to define is the content between the closing tags, right? So that is mind-bending stuff. That is mind-bending stuff. And as you can see, children is now passed as an object to this, right? Where you can get is that. You can get is the content of that. So this is in fact is an HTML element, as it is. So all of this was quite revealing in terms of understanding is now how you can build and doing that kind of stuff. But I think the most relevant part is that as we move on with the foundation of React, and then we started to look at the application structure where the index act as the setup, all right? This is the file where you're adding some CSS or some other, but this is more like the setup function, right? The setup file, right? It can only have one render. You can have multiple render. If you want to render multiple trees inside of your application, but usually there is no need to that. You just only use one single render for, all right? This index is typically like the setup function here. So when you do things like, hey, I want to import is a CSS file or set up any error logging service here. And then you have now the app. This is where the React stuff matters, or the home-based components. Things is where you're going to add things like React routers or the context or providers. Again, stuff that we're gonna see that later. And the models, which is something that we're quite familiar, which is the way of how you are going to define is your UI as a function here, you know? And the UI will have is a particular state as well as an HTML tag and some style associated to it. So for example, like this. So because this is now how do we organize our applications in index and app and as well as the models, all right? The other question is, all right, good. Yeah, good. So we talk about GSX, all right? So far we have talked about React, GSX, why it is important. This particularly new way of defining is, or to writing application, which is this component base, and what is the anatomy of the component base as well, where you have the syntax, how this looks like, the props, the children's, some particular exercise, the application structure, and some content that is specific to React, for example, fragments, and how can we use fragments to encapsulate is particular specific content, right? And you may wonder, well, okay, good, good, that's good. Uh, it won't pollute the HTML DOM if you do that. And then we look at how can we now render collections of values, okay, or a list of values, all right? What are objects? And unfortunately, here there is no way of how can we actually render objects in React, at least not in React 18, where I am familiar with. So the way of how you can now render lists of collections or iterate through a list of collections is, well, using now an array. Okay, so you can is mapping over data like so. It's called the iteration, and this is the reason why, and it makes a lot of sense why, for example, the ECMAScript actually has pushed everything forward to concept like iterations, all right? Because to be honest, the truth of this is the spec is moving where the money is, right? Where the incentives are. And here, because Facebook or Meta and TikTok, specifically Meta, have invested heavily on JavaScript and the technology, as well as with on the web in general, right? So on the web and PHP, it turns out that they have to, not only because people that work with that technology have to push the boundary of PHP as well as JavaScript, and that makes a lot of sense. To go with this. That makes a lot of sense. Look at this. It's now in version 8.4. I'm assuming that a lot of people out there are mainly using is PHP. In version 7 or 6, something like that. Please do not use this version in production. It is an early and test version. A popular general purpose scripting language, similar to, well, holy French toast. PHP 8.4 is a major update of the PHP language. It contains many new features such as property hooks, asymmetric visibility, an update DOM API, and performance improvement, bug fix, and general cleanup. Holy moly. Asymmetric visibility, deprecated attributes, new XDOM features, and HTML5 support. HTML5 support? What? You didn't support that? New DOM API that includes standard compliant for parsing HTML document. Oh my god. But it's a new DOM API. Standard compliant. Oh, okay. Fix several long-standing compliant bugs in the behavior of DOM functionality, and add several functions to make working with documents more convenient. Object API for BC Math. New array functions. Okay. PDO driver specific subclasses. Okay. New my class method without parentheses. and new classes, interface, and functions. Deprecations and backward compatibility breaks. Oh, new lazy object. And migrations are plagued, man. We are plagued with migrations, man. We are plagued with migrations. And here, this is the manual. Holy moly. Installation and configuration. General installations. Language reference. Basic type. Basic syntax, type, variables, and content and expressions. Operator, control flow, functions, classes. This is the anatomy of any language, of the most of language here, like this until here. And the type and variables, basics. Mm-hmm. 4 years ago, and I seen at gm.com clear console variable declaration rules and classification. Variable declaration rules start with $. First letter of variable count from A to AC. The next letter of the variable name come from this. No space, no syntax. Global server request predefined variables. In PHP 8 and user defined variables. Okay. Alright, okay. Good. This is how you define variables. What are the types or the values that you can have here? Okay, the type system. So whether it's a scalar type, bool, int, float, string, or whether it's array, object, resource, never, void, relative class type, self, parent, and static, singleton types, false and true, unit types, and user defined, interface class and enumerations, as well as callable. And here is describing is each one of them. Booleans, integer, floating point numbers, integers. Converting to integers. Here you don't have anything like coercion. If you're gonna do that, you have to go with your own stuff here. Okay. Again, I know. Be aware of flow to incast overflow. But I do think it's in 7 years old, 70 years old. A leading zero is a numeric literal, means this is an octal. But don't be confused. A leading zero is a string does not. In a string does not thus. Oh, this is a PHP. Oh, because it also do coercion here. It does coercion here. Oh my god, it does coercion. Oh crap. Oh my god. Okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Holy hell. Expressions and constants and things like that. But again, I mention is this because similar to templated language, uh, or yeah, similar to templated language, where you want to use a specific language defined for them. Here in JavaScript, we don't have to do that, and in fact, this is why this is one of the reasons why JavaScript is actually also similar to Python and to PHP, right? Or at least um, all of this language and the people that collaborate and cooperate with this are now is putting effort to add these new features to the language as a way to make our life much more meaningful and easy to go with. So, for example, iteration is a concept that is not new in the language, not anymore, but now is something that you, as a JavaScript developer, must be well aware of this, and that it go from the basic types, it go from the values of the language, like the primitive as well as the object, and how in the object we have now this different way to represent a state in our program and manage that state. So this is why we are actually describing is iteration, so describing that list of elements in there, and how can we now is, well, iterate through our user elements, right? So by defining is or by mapping of all of these elements and return now a new component for that, which is something that we are doing here. And as we iterate through that, because at the end of the day, each one of those components that you create React build or React output a object, and that object has the type, the key, the props, as well as other properties, right? But here the key is something that allow us is to keep track, or allowed React now is to keep track, is the uniqueness of this element, and especially if you're rendering is multiple of these components, right? So that's why we use is now a list to render all of that, and the key is something that is coming from React as a way to uniquely identify and provide some hint to the framework to say, hey, this is now a unique element that I would like you to keep track of this. All right. So don't use this the index of the array, because if you do, the problem is that because they are not unique, all right, and because they can change, because the index of that element can change or can be rearranged, all right, is something that is we're gonna look at that later on in this chapter, but this is how we iterate through elements. Okay, this is iterations. We're mapping over data, using is that, all right, and it is important to, as you mapping here, you're going to return now is a new element, or without that, right? So GSX inside of the GSX, this is what is going to happen when you actually now render that element, which in fact is creating is this, when GSX is transpiled to React, it create now all of this. So it create this element in this case. So it create these unordered elements where their children, it is now this function, all right, is this function here, where each one of those elements that it see here is going to be converted to the React elements and pass the items as the content to it, right? So this is what is going on here when you rendering a list of elements, how this is transformed to that. So this is why we also look at the keys, and the particular exercise, and finally to what we really care in today's video. Give me give me a second, I'll be right back. And we're back. Okay, conditional rendering. So often in React, we'll want to render a chunk of markup based on some conditions. For example, let me put it here. And there you go. So now we got is this conditional rendering. So conditional rendering. So often in React, we'll want to render a chunk of markup based on some conditions. So often in React, we want to render, or we'll want to render a chunk of markup based on some conditions. Right? So for example, maybe we want us to include a little green dot next to the names of our friends who are currently online. So for example, we want to add a little green mark next to our friends that are who are currently online. Next to the names of our friend, next to the name of our friends who are currently online. Okay. Okay, we're gonna see the several techniques to solve this. So let's take a look at several techniques to solve it. Okay, with an if statement. With the curly brackets, we can add a JavaScript expression. We know what a JavaScript expression is. Let me actually refresh a little bit that. Like my expression here by looking at the. Oh my God! You already exactly is language statement and declarations, and defining is a statement, right? Okay. With the curly braces, we can add a JavaScript expression, which is this, an expression statement, okay, an expression statement that it can be and an expression statement, all right, which is here on ECMAScript language expressions, right? And this expression can be an assignment expression with all of this. So it's a condition, it can be a yield, it can be an arrow function, an async arrow function, a left-hand side expressions. That's interesting. Left-hand side expressions, or this one of it. Okay, so it can be an assignment expression, which is a conditional, a yield, an arrow function, or async arrow function, as well as an assignment here. Or it can be an expression, which is an assignment expression. So this is the expressions in the language, right? Expression here. Runtime semantics evaluation. Oh, but this is on the comma, exactly. But here is declaring is an expression. Expression statement. Breakable and a statement. An expression statement. Okay, so it can be is an expression within our GSX, right? Unfortunately, though, we can't add JavaScript statements. And this is why we describe about what is a statement here. So you can't add any block or variable or empty statement or if statement here, right? Not at least in the curly brackets. If the curly brackets, with the curly brackets, we can add a JavaScript expression here. In other words, it must produce something, which is quite interesting. Okay, we can add JavaScript statements. Let's move on here, because at the end of the day, if is a statement. So we can add JavaScript expression within our GSX. Unfortunately, though, we can't add JavaScript statements. As a result, this sort of things is illegal. Exactly. We can add is JavaScript statements. Why doesn't this work? Well, let's consider how this will compile. Let's consider how this will compile. So if, for example, that makes a lot of sense. So if, for example, if we make this, okay, and if we try to compile this by saying, hey, this will create now a React Create element class name. It will create a React Create element Lee with the props of class name, all right, friend, and the content will be now this and a statement as it is, right? And a statement as it is. So despite that this is now JavaScript, this is something that is not valid. Okay, this is not valid, especially if you are defining this as an object here, right? This is not how you pass parameters to a functions. You can pass statements to a functions, only expressions to this. The problem is that we can put an if statement in the middle of a function call like this. To look at a simple example, it wouldn't be equivalent to trying to do this like this. Oh my god, that is quite interesting. With an if statement. With an if statement. With an if statement. With curly brackets, we add JavaScript expression within our GSX, not JavaScript statement. With curly brackets, which is this, we can add JavaScript expressions, and I will want to quote this, okay? JavaScript expressions, not JavaScript statement. like this. And this is now looking at this expression statement like this. And an expression. It can be an assignment expression or an expression, right? Conditional expressions. So I'm going to put it here as an expression. Okay. So consider the following example. So consider the following example. Like this, right? If we compile this, if we transpile this to JavaScript, all right, it'll be something like this. It will say, hey, we're going to, if we transpile this to JavaScript, we'll have something like this. It'll be is it'll be this React create element, okay? We're gonna pass the li followed by the property class name. All right, to that. I'm gonna pass is the li. I'm gonna pass is the class name, and the value of this will be friend. Okay. And the elements that we need to pass here, which will be is this one. No, the content, I mean the content here. Exactly. So the content here it'll be something like this. If is online, right, then you're going to pass is this React.create element here as a div, right? You can pass this div. If that exists, then you get the idea. Is this where now we're gonna put is this green dot and as the we're going to now render something called name here. So that'll be all here and with this as well. So this will be compiled to this. This will be compiled to this, man. And there will be is and that'll be is name here, exactly. So this is where we're gonna pass is now the name. So this is null. We're not gonna render anything inside of this div, but we do in fact render something here, which is the name. Exactly. So all of this is gonna be converting to this. So once we did that, it means that, hey, well, the problem is that we can pass an if statement statement as a function parameter. This is what you need to understand truly JavaScript. Oh yeah, it is. So because of that, the problem is that we can put an if statement in the middle of a function call like this. So similar like this. Okay, the problem is that we can pass an if statement as a function parameter during a function call, right? So similarly doing something like this to console.log, passes, hey, if login or not, right? You can do that. So for a refresher of a statement versus expressions here. Again, this is a very reminder of this. But I prefer to point that out. I know you are doing is anything that you can to actually boil down to a simple aspect and so on and so forth. Okay, I know you want is to actually boil that down to simplify stuff, but you need to read at the doc, man. You need to read at the doc to truly understand what's going on. But to have now to look at the source of this. In any case, okay. So for our refresher on the difference between expression and a statement in JavaScript, you got it. And here's the good news. So we can still use an if statement, but we can have to pull it up so that it's not in the middle of the create React call. All right. So one particularly element here is this. So the good news is that we can so the good news is that we can use an if statement inside of our functions and then return that, right? This is known as early return. We can use an if statement. Yeah. So the good news is that we can use an if statement inside of our function like this. And that'll be compiled to something. Exactly. So there is no rule that say that our JSX has to be part of the return statement, and we can actually is that. So there is no ruling that saying that our JSX has to be part of the JavaScript statement, and this will be compiled to this. And this will be compiled to this. Exactly. It's like, hey, when you detect that, you're gonna say this. So prefix here is now an element, a React element here. If this is online. Mhm. In the code above, prefix will either be assigned to a render element or it won't be defined at all. Like this. This works because React ignores undefined values. Consider the following code. For example, like this. What do you expect the markup look like? Because let is now undefined, because let is now with not any value assigned, okay? Because if we use var, it will be assigned an undefined, but with let, I am not sure what is going to happen. But with let, I am not sure what is going to happen. Static semantic early errors. If the syntax of error is a bound name in the binding list contain let, if it's this, if it is a syntax initializer, it's not present in accounts. Runtime semantic evaluation. Let and const definitions define variables that are a scope to the running execution context, lexical environment. The variables are created when their containing environment record is instantiated but may not be accessed in any way until the variable lexically binding is evaluated. A variable defined by lexical binding with an initializer is assigned the value of its initializer and an assignment expression when the lexical binding is evaluation, not when the variable is created. If a lexical binding in the let declaration does not have an initializer, the variable is assigned the value undefined when the lexical binding is evaluated. So in other words, this will be now undefined. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this, if doesn't have any initializer, oh my god. If this doesn't have any initializer here, okay, it's gonna be assigned the undefined in that lexical scope, okay, which is in this case the block scope, and then it say, hey, the value of this will be undefined. So if you create now an element here, and you say, hey, React create element with the div, the class name, which is now an undefined, all right, and it is a value, okay, but it's undefined in the hello world. That'll be is that. So in other words, it's not going to pass any class name here. You know, it's undefined. It doesn't have anything of this. The following HTML will be produced. In the code above, a variable named some class is created, but isn't giving a value. This means that it resolved to undefined. When React sees that an attribute is being set undefined, it omits that attribute entirely from the DOM. Rather than giving an empty value like class name, it acts as though we haven't tried to set a value. This is true for other falsy values like null and false. During the transpilation, that's what happened. But that is interesting. Undefined attributes. And consider this. A note. Undefined variables. Undefined variables. Okay. Undefined variables. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Undefined attributes. Mm-hmm. What do you expect the markup look like? It'll be this. When React transpile this code, mm-hmm. So when the code is transpiled, or when React is evaluated, okay? So when React sees a exactly when React sees an undefined value associate to a exactly when React sees an undefined value associate to a property, okay, associated to a property, uh, it will not it will not it will not consider that property. It will omit that attribute entirely. It will omit that attribute entirely. From the DOM node. From the DOM node. Rather than giving a value like class name empty. Rather than giving a value rather than giving an empty value like this class undefined here. Because the let variables because the let variable exactly because the let variables uh, because the let variables when they don't have assign any values by default, it is undefined. Okay. Oh my god, what I did. Okay. Undefined is this one, bro. Okay. Holy fuck. So React also does the same for values like null or false. React also does the same for falsy values like false and null. And null. Mm-hmm. Like false and null. Okay. Holy moly. Okay. Interesting. Mm. Hmm. Move on. Next one. Next one, bro. With double ampersand. The downside with using if statement is that we need to pull the logic away from the rest of the markup. While this is perfectly valid, it can make it harder to understand how a component is structured, especially in large and more complex components. We had hoped all over the place to understand what gets returned. This is one of the things of early errors with this component is quite problematic, quite cumbersome to read that. Fortunately, there is a way for us to embed it if logic right in our GSX using the double operator. Okay, if this exists, if this is true, then render this. In JavaScript, it's a control flow operator. It works quite a bit like if else, except it is an expression instead of a statement. To help us understand what actually happening here, let's take a look at exact same logic but expressed using the if and else statement. For example here, function friend here. So if you do this, okay, it is quite hard to read this component, especially if the component does a lot of things. Especially if the component does a lot of things. Yeah. The double operator is said to be a control flow operator because, like if else statement, it will always result in one of the two paths being taken. Right? So in the left hand value is online is falsy. Exactly. If the left hand value is online is falsy, the expression short circuits and evaluates to on is online, which resolves to false. If that value is truthy, however, it generates to it evaluates to whatever is on the right hand side of the operators, which is this. And you can think of the double ampersand operator a bit like a nightclub bouncer. If you try to get in with a fake AV, the bouncer won't let you access the React element. On the other side, if the value is truthy, though the bouncer unhooked the velvet rope and we're allowed to access the React element. Okay. The bouncer, the concept of this, the bouncer of the club. The bouncer of the club, bro. This concept is explained great depth in JavaScript primer lesson, logical operators here. Yes, logical operators here. If you have been working with JavaScript for a while, you're probably familiar with this, which is the short circuit as it is. Let's say you're knowledge with a quick multi-choice question. What is the value of the result? This. So because values here are now, when you are assigned or pass, in this case, primitive values are passed like a copy, all right? You're not creating a new reference. So the value here will be 35, and if 35 is less than 50, it's going to evaluate this first, all right? And then now give it to you is the my age, right? Which is 35. But since this, all right, but because since this is this is a logical operator that is evaluated here, okay, since this is a logical operator, it's going to, this is a great segue here. This is a great segue here, because what it's going to return is true or false from here. All right, true or false. Hey, my age is 35, is less than 50, and the age exists. All right. In this case, it'll be true. Wait, what? Oh, sorry, that incorrect. The answer we're looking is 35. Oh, because I am not quite familiar. Yeah, it's okay. I'm not quite familiar. I'm assuming stuff here. But is this? It's gonna return if this is true or false. And this is actually returning is true. Interesting. So it returns now. Okay, JavaScript. JavaScript. Mm-hmm. Okay. So logical operators. So logical operators like this. Coalesce expression. Coalesce expression head and bitwise or expression. But in this case is this. Logical and expression and bitwise or expressions. The value produced by double ampersand and double operator is not necessarily of type boolean. There you go. The value produced will always be the value of one of the two operand expressions. Of one of the two operand expressions. Logical and expression. Bitwise or expression. Holy moly, bro. Logical or expressions and logical and expressions. So this is like using we can use this as a logical as a control okay, I wasn't aware of this. We can use this as a control flow operators. Holy moly. So we can use this as a control flow operators. Double ampersand like this. Okay, because it's going to evaluate the left hand side as it is. Okay, it's evaluating the left hand side and then the bitwise or expression. the bitwise or expression. Runtime semantic. Holy moly. Jesus. Okay. And 4 is assigned as a result. Exactly. If the left side is now so if the left side is a logical AND expression or a bitwise OR expression, okay. But if this is a logical AND expression and logical AND expression, which is logical AND expression and bitwise OR expressions, it's going to evaluate the logical AND expression, and this is the runtime semantic evaluations. Okay, this is as describing is the abstract operation here. There you French those are, bro. Holy fuck. Runtime semantic evaluation, logical AND expression, and bitwise operation. is because of this. So if the left ref evaluation and a logical and expression, and if the left, okay, let the left reference be an evaluation of the logical and expression, and then let val be the get value of that. So what is the value that you're gonna get from this? All right, this is an abstract operation. The get value takes arguments v, whether it's a reference, record, or an ECMAScript value, and return either a normal completion of this, which is this one. The evaluation here of logical and expression, similar to the get value here. So hey, this will now produce is a value, and if this value, when you want to coerce this, okay, and when you want to coerce the left value, exactly, and when you try to coerce this value is false, if you can't coerce that, return the left value. If the right ref, like this, be the evaluation of bitwise or expression, and let the ref be this one, the evaluation of bitwise or expression, and the return will be the get value. Okay. Okay, if you can coerce the left operand, okay, return the left value. Okay, if the coercion of that value is false, is a falsy value, return the value. If it's not, return this. Return the get value reference error. So in other words, give me a couple examples of this, motherfucker. Okay, give me example of this. Functions as a first class value in JavaScript. You got it. The following text from the spec provide real use cases to understand the abstract operation. Step 1, evaluation of the left side and get value. Evaluation of the left side and get value. Short circuit on falsy. The key step exactly is short circuit on falsy. If this is false, okay, return the value. if this is false, once I coerce this, if this is false, return null, never evaluate user.name. If one of them is false, it never or a falsy value. Exactly. If one of them is a falsy value, you're gonna you're gonna return whatever is on the left. You're gonna return whatever is on the left. If I coerce this, if one of them now give me a falsy value, okay, and falsy value is like this. So for example is, oh my god, if one of them is return me a falsy value here, not only null, all right, not only null, but if you return me is another falsy value like an empty null undefined, you're gonna throw me an undefined. If you put it here like null, you're gonna return me null. If you give me now another falsy value, which is -0, it's gonna give you 0. If this is 0, of course, if this is not a number because it's a falsy value, so empty string is another one. Okay, if the left operand is one of these falsy values, right? All right, it will get that. If it's not, all right. If it is, okay, if it is true, so if that actually contains is a value, all right, given the coercion, then it's going to now return whatever is on the username, which is in this case is nothing. Which is in this case now, so you can do something like this. You say, hey, right? And if you have the evaluator, it's going to return is whatever is on here. So this actually acts as an if statement here. Holy moly, bro. Holy moly. So I don't know JavaScript. This is one of they discovering this kind of stuff. So what it's doing here is this is true, okay, but because it is evaluating is this, and when it evaluate this, it say, hey, this expression is true. All right, if this is true, okay, if this is true, which is, well, not it is. If this is true, then you're going to return whatever is on the left side, which is 35, man. Exactly. This resolved to true. My age resolved to 35, which is true t value. And both sides are true to the whole thing should evaluate true, right? Afraid not. The operator isn't designed to produce a Boolean value. It is designed to resolve to one of the expressions, and it's either the side of the operator or this. That is quite interesting. That is quite interesting. So if this is, so if one of the, so if the left side operator is false, Okay, the rest then it's going to return is false. If this is a true t value, then it's going to go with the next one. Hey, if this is a true t value, yes, with the next one. If this is a true t value, yes, go to the next one, and so on. Okay, if one of them is a false c value along the way, then at the end of the day, it's gonna return is whatever value this is. Holy moly, I didn't know about anything in JavaScript, man. Holy crap. You gotta be kidding me. 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 Holy shit. Okay. Definitely, I don't know anything of JavaScript. So if there is a true t value, number of children, and there is a true t value, parking has been, and there is a true t value, we get then to return is whatever is on here. Let admission ticket this if number of children admission ticket number of children if exactly it's like you do all of this elf is elf is elf is elf is elf is okay, so exactly this is exactly like you do this. Hey, if this exists, or if this exists, or if this exists, or if this exists, and yada 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 yada, then you're gonna do is this. Then you're gonna run, and then you're going to assign is this. Admission ticket will be assigned to the first falsy expression. If we make it through all the gates, admission tickets will be assigned to the final expression, whether it's truthy or falsy. There is a more interesting takeaway here. The generate ticket function is only called if we can make it through all the gates. If in the first example, when signature on waiver was false, the generate ticket was never called. This is because of short circuiting. If one of the expression before of the AND operator evaluate to a falsy value, the rest of expressions are skipped. They won't be executed at all. Here's a less complex example. So if you return now a falsy value, I will never run this because false is a falsy value and the gate remains locked and the console log never fires. It is the same as if the console log was in an if statement, something like this. Exactly. And the other is the OR operator. The OR operator, it is exactly like the operator with one key different. This doesn't stop and provide the first falsy value. It stops and provide the first truthy value. We check the first expression user image source with null, which is null because it is a falsy value. The double gate is unlocked and we proceed onwards. So in this case, if this is like a gate here. So if this now detect any on the left side any falsy value, it will go to the next one. But if this detects a truthy value, it will go to the next one until the right operators, it will return that. Holy moly, bro. Oh, my French toast guy, bro. The second expression, thing image source, is also null. So it opens up, it unlocks the gate to this. And as we make it to the final item. The final item is provided regardless of whatever is truthy or falsy. And so source will be assigned to the default image source. However, in this case, we're going to assign is the user image because it is truthy and the first gate remains locked. Here's how we represent this in code. Holy moly. So I get it wrong because I didn't know how the things work. And there is nothing wrong about that. Common gotcha the number 0. Exactly. Common gotcha with the number 0 because it's going to evaluate its falsy value. It will never evaluate this next one. And it only really makes sense to render that component if we have at least one item in our shopping list. If you have been using JavaScript for a while, you might know that every number in JavaScript is true except 0. 0 is the only falsy number, just like empty string is the only false string. Therefore, it seems to make sense to do things this way. If number of item has at least one item in it, it will be truthy and will render the shopping list element if we have 0 items. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So therefore, it seems to make sense to do things this way. If number of items has at least one element, exactly, it has greater than one. Okay. Because otherwise, it's gonna render the falsy values. Exactly. Because this is how JavaScript actually works. Hey, return whatever false value it is. Even though that you can say something like this and say false, it will print or it will return value here. It returns any of these falsy values. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's because of this evaluation. We went up being 0, being rendered. Why this is happening? Is this happening because the algorithm that works with the double ampersand, it say whatever is on the left side, if the left side is a falsy value, I'm gonna return that. I'm gonna return that. Exactly. In fact, let's see how React handles all of the different falsy values. False as false, undefined as undefined, null at null, empty string at empty string, 0 as 0, and not a number as not a number. Oh, this is what it gets rendered. React, we actually render the number 0, and we want to think about it. This makes sense. There's a lot of situation where we want to render this number. Of course, number of Jira ticket remained 0. Not an empty space. Solution, always use Boolean values with double here. That is mind-bending, bro. There is a handy ESLint rule that will warn when your expression could potentially result in an unexpected 0 or not a number showing up in the UI GSX no leak render. I haven't personally used it since I only learned of it recently, but it seems helpful, especially while you're still learning about GSX and its quirk. You can learn more about the ESC and the tool of the trade, the model. That's interesting. Very, very interesting. Holy moly. And the other is the with double ampersands and with ternary. The operators allow us to conditionally render something if a condition is met. But what if we want to render something else if the condition isn't met? For example, suppose we're building an admin dashboard. If the user is logged in, we want to render the chart and the tables of everything. If they're not logged in, we want to render a short message asking them to log in. So whether you use this or this, all right, we could use the two operators like this. This will work, but it's a bit clunky. Fortunately, we can use a ternary operator to help us here. To say, hey, if the user is not logged in, okay, we're gonna ask here. Exactly. If the user is not logged in, we want to render this. But my main problem was because I didn't understand is, holy fuck, my main problem was because I didn't understand is how JavaScript works and the primitives and the values and all that kind of stuff. The ternary operator isn't new. It's been part of JavaScript language since Internet Explorer 3 launched in 1996. But for a long time, it was a pretty obscure language feature. It is particularly useful in React content because it allows to embed an if-else logic within our GSX. Because a ternary operator is an operator instead of a statement, it can be used inside of a JavaScript expression. And a ternary operator consists in this. This is the condition, and if it's true, first expression. Or not, second expression. And they are expressions. If condition is truthy, the first expression will be one that gets evaluated. If it is falsy, the second expression will be evaluated instead. And then you have short circuiting. Quick question. What do you think will happen when the following code runs? Console.log condition. Console.log first and console.log second condition. Which log will fire and in what order? Well, let's take a look now at the language in itself. This one, the conditional operator, right? And let's go to read about it. The grammar of the conditional expression in ECMAScript is slightly different from that in C and Java, which each allow the second sub-expression to be an expression, but restrict the third expression to be a conditional expression. The motivation for this difference in ECMAScript is allowing an assignment expressions to be governed by either arm or of a condition, and to eliminate the confusion and fairly useless case of comma expression as the center expression. So in other words, this is the runtime semantic. As you can see here, you get this short circuit expression, or it can be short circuit expression okay, followed by the assignment expression and the another assignment. And as you can see, this is what can an assignment be. Whether it's a conditional, a yield, an arrow function, an async arrow function, left hand side, with all of this. Okay. So let the left ref be the evaluation of short circuit expression. Okay, and short circuit expression is a logical OR expression or collapse expression. So let the left to be Boolean, okay, and the coerce that, get the value of the left and then coerce that into a Boolean, and if the left is true, okay, so once you coerce that, and if that is true, okay, evaluation of short circuit, if this is true, once this is coerced to a Boolean, then let the true ref be the evaluation of the first assignment, which is this, and then return the get value of the true ref. Okay, and then return the value of this. Otherwise, you say is let false the evaluation of the second assignment expression. So because it's going to coerce that, since it's going to attempt to coerce this console.log, and this console.log to get that value, it is now a function, and a function is a truthy value. It's going to bring this here, the first condition. And the second condition, what the fuck? Really? It's a, okay, console.log condition, it evaluating is this, and since this is now a function, it's gonna coerce this, because it's trying to coerce that Boolean but it say that it is false. Because it cannot, okay, because console, since this is a, what? So, that is interesting here. Because console.log returns undefined. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Because console.log returns undefined, and undefined is a false value. Holy shit. It's going to print first condition and then the second condition. You gotta be freaking kidding me, man. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave this as it is. And And that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye. Holy moly.